The curtain at the Théâtre des Rêves fell with a soft hush, and the room erupted into thunderous applause. Elegant women in pearl-studded gowns clapped beside men in crisp tuxedos, their gloved hands meeting with practiced enthusiasm. The final act of La Saisine, a psychological drama tinged with post-war disillusionment, had concluded with a haunting soliloquy from its star, Miss Vivienne St. Clair, a performance so searing even the critics in the front row forgot to scribble. Backstage, the cast began exchanging light embraces and cigarettes, already glowing with the warm aftertaste of a well-received show. But Vivienne, the woman everyone came to see, remained absent. Henri Duval, the aging director and playwright of La Saisine, stood at the wings, shifting uncomfortably in his black overcoat. His white scarf drooped around his neck like a noose. "Where is she?" he muttered to no one in particular. A stagehand, breathless from darting between prop tables, shrugged. I think she went to her dressing room before curtain fall," the boy offered, eyes wide. Duval didn't wait. He hurried down the narrow backstage corridor, his patent leather shoes clapping against the parquet floor. The corridor smelled of grease paint, dust, and wilted orchids. Vivienne's name was stenciled in gold across a wooden door, slightly ajar. Duval knocked once. "Vivienne." "My dear." No answer. He pushed the door open and froze. Vivienne St. Clair sat at her dressing table, fully made up, still in costume. Her posture was rigid, like a doll left too long on a shelf. A single bright spotlight above cast eerie shadows across her face. Her blue eyes blinked slowly as though waking from a long dream. Duval stepped closer, concerned. "Ma chère, is everything all right?" Vivienne turned to face him, her lips trembling. Who am I?" she whispered. Duval's stomach dropped. "What sort of joke is this?" "I don't remember anything," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know my name. I don't know this place." She stared at her reflection in the mirror, studying it like it belonged to someone else. Word spread quickly. Within an hour, the theater was swarming with hushed whispers and clicking heels. The performance's triumph was forgotten. Vivienne St. Clair, darling of the Paris stage, had seemingly lost all memory of herself, of her past, of her fame. By morning, newspapers screamed the headline, "Actress forgets herself. Vivienne St. Clair suffers mysterious collapse." Naturally, it didn't take long for Hercule Poirot to receive a telephone call. The voice on the other end was that of Madame Léonie Marchand, a grand patron of the arts and benefactor of the Théâtre des Rêves. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone clipped with practiced elegance, "we have a rather delicate matter. Miss St. Clair's condition is most disturbing, and the doctors are baffled, but I believe this is not a matter for medicine." "It is a matter for you," Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You believe someone has made her forget." "I believe," said Léonide, "that someone wanted her silenced." That afternoon, Poirot arrived at the Théâtre des Rêves. He was dressed immaculately in a dove-gray suit, with his signature black mustaches waxed into perfect symmetry. He stood at the entrance, glancing up at the theater's facade, a relic of Belle Époque decadence, now aging with quiet dignity. Inside, he was met by Madame Marchand herself, a statuesque woman with a hawk-like face and a velvet turban perched atop her silver hair. She led him directly to the dressing room where Vivienne still sat, flanked by two nurses. She did not recognize Poirot, nor anyone else. "She has no identification on her," the nurse whispered. "No address book, no wallet." Nothing but the costume and a small locket. Poirot was handed the locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a child, perhaps 7 years old, and a woman whose face was partially scratched out. The initials on the back read, "JS, to my brightest star." He turned back to the actress. Her hair was meticulously curled, her makeup flawless, but the spark behind her eyes was gone. Do you know this object, mademoiselle? Poirot asked gently, holding the locket out. Vivienne stared at it, expressionless. No, she said quietly. Should I? Poirot nodded once and turned to Leonide. Tell me, madame, who benefits if the lady forgets who she is? That question hung in the room like smoke. Over the next hour, Poirot asked precise, delicate questions. Who was in the theatre last night? Who had access to her dressing room? Who had reason to fear what Miss St. Clair might reveal? Leonide Marchand hesitated before replying. There were tensions, she said at last. Vivienne was considering withdrawing from the production before opening night. There was a row with Henri Duval. She suspected someone had been tampering with her script, changing lines. She said she no longer trusted the people around her. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And yet she performed? She was proud and frightened, but she wouldn't tell me of what he glanced at the photograph again. J. Who might that be? Leonide's lips tightened. Her real name, as I recall, is Juliette Sauvage. But she never spoke of her past. She reinvented herself here. Poirot folded the locket into his pocket and stood. Then we must also reinvent the truth, madame. From fragments, from shadows. But fear not. Hercule Poirot is most skilled at assembling puzzles. He walked to the door, pausing. Let us not assume it is illness, or madness, or stress. No. Let us suppose it is something far more deliberate. That night, as the city lights flickered outside the quiet theatre, Poirot made his way to the stage. He walked alone across the wooden floor, stopping center stage. He bent down. A small glint near the footlight caught his eye. A broken glass ampule, the size of a fingertip. He held it up to the dim light. His brows narrowed. A false memory, he murmured. Or rather, the removal of a true one. The morning after his initial visit to the Théâtre des Rêves, Hercule Poirot returned with a small notebook tucked into his inside pocket and a purpose already forming behind his eyes. The mystery was not merely one of lost memory. It was of identity stolen, concealed, or perhaps willfully erased. And so it was necessary to speak not only to the lady who forgot herself, but to all those who had a vested interest in that forgetting. Leonide Marchand had arranged a private gathering in one of the theatre's rehearsal salons. The room was austere, bare wooden floors, faded velvet drapes, and a few mismatched chairs arranged like a crooked jury box. One by one, the players were summoned, each with a unique relationship to Vivienne St. Clair, each with their own secrets. Henri Duval was already there, seated by the window, lighting his third cigarette in 10 minutes. He tapped the ash into a porcelain dish bearing the theatre's crest and watched Poirot with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. You think this is a crime? He asked. A woman forgets herself, and you come as though it were murder. Poirot responded with a polite smile. Murder, Monsieur Duval, takes many forms. The killing of reputation, of autonomy. Of truth, Duval chuckled mirthlessly. She was always theatrical. Perhaps this is her greatest performance. Poirot said nothing. He simply wrote Duval's words in his notebook and turned as the door opened again. In swept Odette Mercier, the ingénue of the company, young, brittle, ambitious. She was dressed as though attending a matinee party in soft pinks with lace gloves, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Is this an interrogation? She asked, flicking her gaze toward Duval and then Poirot. Only a conversation, Poirot said, to understand the environment in which Mademoiselle St. Clair lost herself. Odette lowered herself into a chair with a theatrical sigh. Vivienne was under pressure. She took laudanum sometimes. I saw the bottles. Perhaps too much. Poirot nodded, but did not confirm. And were you close, mademoiselle? I understudied her, Odette replied quickly. That's as close as one can get. I admired her, of course. But she was, difficult, suspicious. She accused people of things, of stealing costumes, scripts, of whispering behind her back, Duval muttered. She accused me of sabotaging her lines. Then, louder, she thought someone was trying to unseat her. Always paranoid. Was there reason to be? Poirot asked gently. The next arrival was Sébastien Lenoir, the theater's stage manager, a man with a salt-and-pepper beard and an aura of resigned competence. He offered Poirot a stiff handshake. I manage coups, not egos, he said flatly. But yes, the atmosphere was tense. Things went missing. Her script was found with changes she didn't authorize. Props moved, and twice the sandbags weren't properly secured. Sabotage? Poirot asked. Sébastien shrugged. Carelessness or design, hard to tell. But she was rattled. Poirot noted how none of them denied the possibility of deliberate interference. The tone of each voice was edged with something else. Resentment, perhaps. Or guilt. Next came the theater's doctor, Marcel Aubry, who had briefly examined Vivian following her collapse. A man of science, he was quick to dismiss exotic theories. She experienced a trauma, likely psychological, a fugue state, perhaps. No physical injury, no signs of poison. He paused, then added with a note of irritation, but of course, you have your own methods. Poirot inclined his head. Tell me, doctor. If someone wished to induce such amnesia, what would they use? Aubry frowned. A barbiturate could disorient. Hyoscine in high doses might cause memory issues, but there'd be side effects. Dry mouth, blurred vision. Nothing subtle, theatrical, almost. Would it require ingestion? Poirot asked. Ingestion or inhalation, Aubry replied. Why? Poirot removed a small glass ampoule from his pocket, the one he'd discovered the night before on the stage floor. Aubry leaned closer, adjusting his spectacles. Where did you find this? Beneath the footlights, Poirot answered. I did not touch it directly. But I suspect it was not there by accident. Aubry sniffed, intrigued despite himself. It looks pharmaceutical, possibly from a sedative kit. But I'd need proper equipment to confirm Poirot pocketed it again and made a mental note to consult a chemist discreetly. The play unfolding behind the scenes was beginning to take shape, though its climax remained elusive. The final person Poirot wished to speak to was not a member of the cast at all, but a visitor. An elegant gentleman who had reportedly attended every rehearsal for the past 3 weeks and yet remained unnamed in the production credits. Charles Davina arrived late. Tall, smooth-voiced, with a pocket square as crisp as his handshake. Monsieur Poirot, he said, I confess I hoped to meet you under different circumstances. Poirot studied him carefully. You are an admirer of Mademoiselle Sinclair. I am a patron of the arts, Devine replied smoothly. Vivienne and I were involved once. Nothing scandalous, I assure you. But lately, she had grown distant. I feared she was under some influence, subtle or otherwise. Did she confide in you? Devine hesitated. She asked me to look into something, a letter that went missing from her room. A very private letter. She believed someone had taken it. What did it contain? I never saw it. Only that it was signed by someone with the initials J.S. She grew increasingly agitated after its disappearance. That name again. Juliette Sauvage. A person, a ghost, or perhaps merely a discarded identity. With the interviews concluded, Poirot thanked the group and stepped outside into the theater's empty lobby. Dust motes floated in the beams of light slanting through the stained glass above. He stood perfectly still, allowing his thoughts to gather into their precise mental compartments. 5 people, 5 opportunities, each with access, each with motive. He whispered aloud, the sabotage, the fear, the missing letter, the locket, and now a memory erased. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the head of his cane. The theater is not merely a place for drama. It is a place for illusion. Someone has pulled a curtain over the truth behind him. Léonide Marchand approached quietly. "Well," she asked, "do you believe her memory will return?" Poirot turned slowly. "Madame, I do not wait for the truth to return. I go to fetch it myself." Though Hercule Poirot had already stepped foot within the Théâtre des Rêves, his true arrival, methodical, formal, and complete, occurred on the third day when he insisted on taking control of the investigation in the manner he deemed proper. A small corner office was cleared for his use, away from the distracting aroma of grease paint and the echo of rehearsals. He requested a detailed list of the company members, access to Vivien's dressing room, and copies of the original and final script drafts. With a fresh carnation in his lapel and his patent leather shoes polished to brilliance, Poirot installed himself like a general entering a battlefield of whispers. Vivienne St. Clair remained under supervision. The hospital had little to offer. Her vitals were stable, her physical health unimpaired, and her behavior consistent with dissociative amnesia. But Poirot knew better than to accept such an explanation at face value. The human mind did not erase itself without reason, and in Vivien's case, the erasure seemed both too specific and too conveniently timed. He began with her dressing room. The small chamber still held the faint perfume of lilies and cold cream. Her vanity mirror was rimmed in warm bulbs, some flickering. A half-finished cup of tea sat beside her silver-backed hairbrush. Poirot bent low, inspecting the items without touching. He noted the teacup. Lipstick still on the rim. No residue visible, but he would have it examined nonetheless. He tapped the surface of the table with a gloved fingertip, tracing invisible patterns. Next, the wardrobe. Gowns hung in plastic covers, costumes mostly, though one plain beige trench coat hung at the far end, clearly not part of the production. He checked its pockets. A monogrammed handkerchief, the initial V, and a matchbook from a place called Le Figaro Noir, a small jazz club in Montparnasse. Poirot made a note. He turned to the drawers. The second one caught his attention. It had a false bottom. He pressed gently on the rear panel, and it gave way with a soft click. Inside were only two things: a bottle of laudanum, more than half empty, and a crumpled envelope bearing a torn seal. No letter inside. Just the envelope, addressed in looping script. Mademoiselle Juliette Sauvage, care of Théâtre des Rêves, Paris. He lifted it with care. Juliette Sauvage, not Vivienne St. Clair. A past self, perhaps, and whoever wrote the letter knew her real name. Poirot exited the dressing room and summoned Sébastien Lenoir, the stage manager. Monsieur Lenoir, he said, who had access to Mademoiselle St. Clair's room. Lenoir rubbed the back of his neck. She kept it locked, mostly. But during performances, it's left ajar so she can move between scenes. The cleaning staff have keys, as do I, anyone else. Lenoir hesitated. Duval? Maybe. He'd go in sometimes to deliver rewrites. And Odette, she visited frequently. Did she ever express concern over the letter? Or mention the name Juliette Sauvage? Lenoir blinked. She did. Once. She asked me if we ever got mail addressed to that name, said it might be important. I told her no. I didn't know, then it was her. Poirot nodded. Merci. The next place to visit was the theatre's records office, where he requested Vivienne's employment file. He was not surprised to find it sparse. The biography was carefully constructed. Born in Marseille, trained in London, debuted in Phèdre at age 20. But there was no mention of a previous name. No mention of Juliette Sauvage. Poirot sat quietly for several minutes, then rose with new resolve and made his way through the staff corridors to Léonide Marchand's office. She was seated at her desk, dictating letters to her assistant, but stopped when Poirot entered. "You found something?" she asked. Poirot closed the door gently behind him. "Madame, you knew her real name?" Leonide pursed her lips. "I suspected. She never confirmed it, but when she joined the company years ago, she was evasive about her past. I respected her reinvention. It is not uncommon in the theater. She received a letter under that name," Poirot said, placing the envelope on the desk. "It is now missing, but she hid the envelope in a false drawer." Leonide's brows furrowed. "Then she feared it would be seen." "Indeed. And now she has forgotten herself entirely." One might conclude that someone wanted her past buried. Leonide stood and walked slowly to the window, her hands clasped behind her back. Vivienne was not always beloved. Talent attracts envy. She had a way of making enemies without trying. Who stood to lose the most if she remembered something crucial? Poirot asked. "Duval," she said without hesitation. "Henri has been teetering on the edge of irrelevance. This play was his redemption. If Vivienne walked away, or worse, exposed something about him, it would be the end of him." Poirot considered this, then asked a final question. "Have you ever heard of Le Figaro Noir?" Leonide's gaze sharpened. "Of course. It's a haunt for actors. Late-night jazz, discreet corners. Why? I believe she was there recently. I shall pay them a visit." That evening, Poirot took a cab to Montparnasse. Le Figaro Noir was nestled on a dim side street, its crimson awning faded and peeling. Inside, cigarette smoke curled beneath the ceiling fans, and a woman in a gold dress crooned beside a double bass. Poirot took a corner table and ordered espresso. He observed. The crowd was theatre folk. Stagehands, washed-up playwrights, a few up-and-comers with nervous smiles. After half an hour, the bartender approached, eyeing Poirot's tailored suit with polite skepticism. "You're not a regular," he said. Poirot nodded. "No, but I seek someone who may be. A lady, Vivienne St. Clair." The bartender stiffened. "She was here last Thursday. Sat with a man, arguing. Left early. Did you catch his name?" "No, but she called him Charles Devine, the patron with the crisp suit and evasive manner." Poirot finished his coffee slowly, then returned to his lodging for the night. He laid out everything on his writing desk. The matchbook, the envelope, the ampule, the list of suspects. Slowly, deliberately, he began to draw connections. Vivienne, Juliet, had received a letter from someone who knew her past. She feared exposure. The letter went missing. A sedative may have been used to cloud her mind, and now she floated in confusion while others whispered about her performance. He stood and looked at himself in the mirror. "It is not only the audience who must be fooled in the theater," he murmured. "It is also the actors." Then one detail returned to him. The sandbags, unsecured. Twice, not enough to kill, just enough to frighten, enough to destabilize. Someone had not intended to harm her body, but her mind. He returned to the theater the next morning with one purpose. It was time to confront Charles Devine. The morning air outside the Théâtre des Rêves was brittle with winter's breath as Hercule Poirot waited in the lobby, hands folded neatly over the silver head of his cane. The theater was closed to the public for the day, a rare concession granted by Leonide Marchand. Silence filled the vast interior like a fog, broken only by the occasional creak of wooden beams or the distant echo of a technician moving about above the stage. Poirot had summoned Charles Devine for a private interview. The man arrived precisely on time, gloved, composed, and wearing an expression that straddled courtesy and careful wariness. "I was told you had questions, monsieur," he said as he removed his coat, laying it across the back of the red velvet settee where Poirot indicated he should sit. "I always have questions, Monsieur Devine," Poirot said, seating himself across from him, but I prefer to ask them when the ears of others are not present. Devine gave a mild smile, but his eyes were alert. Then I assume this concerns Vivienne. Oui, Poirot said gently, or as she was known in a former life, Juliette Sauvage. That caught Devine off guard. A moment's hesitation, the briefest tightening of the jaw. She told you. Poirot steepled his fingers. Non. She cannot tell me anything at present, but you have confirmed the name, merci. You see, monsieur, the mind forgets only what it fears to remember, or what someone else fears it will. Devine didn't answer immediately. Then he crossed one leg over the other and said, I cared deeply for her. Still do, but we were complicated. I wanted to help her, but she did not trust easily. She had history. Pain she never spoke of. Poirot tapped a small notebook with his finger. You were seen with her at Le Figaro Noir 1 week ago, arguing she was upset. She believed someone had stolen a letter. She thought it had to do with a threat from the past, but she wouldn't say who it was from. She only said it was signed J.S., same initials as her real name. A coincidence? Poirot asked. I thought so at first. But she was afraid. She kept saying someone was watching her. Not in the theater, somewhere else. She believed they knew who she used to be. Poirot's voice lowered. Did you? Devine's expression grew somber. I knew enough. Years ago, she told me she'd run from something. A scandal. A man. She had no family left. She said she had buried Juliette in Marseille and become Vivienne in Paris. I never pushed, but something changed a few weeks ago. Yes, Poirot said softly. The letter. I never saw it, but I believe its content triggered everything. From that moment on, she was unsettled, suspicious of everyone. Even me, Poirot, nodded once, satisfied, for the moment. But something in Devine's phrasing had struck a false note. Not a lie, but a deflection. He filed the detail away for later. Poirot's next interview was with Odette Mercier. She arrived looking over-prepared, her lipstick fresh, her blouse too perfectly tucked. She smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. Such a terrible situation, she said, easing into a chair in the green room. I've always admired Vivienne. So talented, so intense, and so threatened, no? Poirot asked mildly. She blinked. I don't follow. She believed someone was trying to undermine her. You visited her dressing room frequently, rehearsed in her shadow. You told me yourself she was unstable. I never said... Poirot raised a finger delicately. Words, mademoiselle. I remember them all. You implied. That is enough, Odette flushed. Look, she was the star. I understudied her, yes, but I wasn't after her role. At least, not that way. Everyone dreams of the spotlight, but I respected her. She was brilliant, if paranoid. Did you ever see her receive mail under a different name? Odette hesitated. Once, a week before opening night. She opened a letter and her whole face changed. She folded it up, said nothing, and locked it away. I didn't see it again. And what did you do afterward? I left. I had rehearsal. That was all. Poirot tapped his cane gently on the floor. You did not think to ask her what disturbed her? Odette looked away. Vivienne didn't invite questions. If she was scared, she didn't say why. Were you in her dressing room the night of her collapse? No, I was on stage, waiting for the final cue. I didn't see her until the curtain call, only she wasn't there. Poirot made a note. Merci. Next came Henri Duval. The playwright was less cooperative, impatient from the first moment. I've told you, he snapped, the woman was unstable. And now everyone is turning this into a circus. A woman forgets who she is, and that is not cause for inquiry? Poirot asked mildly. Duval scowled. Vivienne was planning to walk away from the show. After all I've done to revive her career, I wrote this piece for her, and she treated me like a stranger. She believed you were rewriting her lines. Subtly, undermining her, I made changes for pacing, Duval snapped. Actors always object when their monologues are trimmed. She thought I was conspiring with Odette to steal her spotlight. Absurd. I don't care who plays the part, as long as it brings acclaim. You were seen leaving her dressing room days before the opening. Uninvited, I left her a note. Revisions. She wouldn't speak to me. And the letter? Poirot asked suddenly. Duval frowned. What letter? Exactly. Duval stood. If you've nothing more, monsieur, I'll be in the lighting gallery. Some of us are still trying to run a theater. Poirot let him leave. The last of the day's interviews was Sébastien Lenoir, who returned with a sheaf of documents. Stage notes, prop schedules, incident reports. Poirot accepted them gratefully. You are methodical, Monsieur Lenoir. I admire this. I like things orderly, the man replied with a quiet shrug. Too many people in theater thrive on chaos. I prefer lists. Poirot opened a report dated 9 days prior. This note here, the sandbag rigging. You mentioned it came loose during rehearsal? Yes. It nearly fell on Vivian during her entrance. Could have crushed her. Was it investigated? Of course. The rigging was secure earlier that day. Someone must have tampered with it, but no one saw anything. Poirot narrowed his eyes. And it happened twice, yes? The second time was minor. A lighting fixture tilted too far, but again, dangerous. Poirot tapped the paper. Tell me, Monsieur Lenoir, who last handled the rigging that night? Lenoir scanned the eye. Report, Jean-Claude. One of the technicians. But he wasn't even on shift the second time. The schedule shows Odette had the key to the fly system. Poirot paused. Interesting. He thanked Lenoir and returned to his office. The puzzle had edges now, and the pieces were forming. A woman in fear, a letter gone missing, a theater filled with ambition and quiet grudges, a fall that never happened, and a mind erased without a scratch. He wrote a single sentence in his notebook. Who was Juliet, and what did she know that made someone rewrite her story? He would find out. Memory could be stolen, but not without leaving fingerprints. The following morning, the Théâtre des Rêves buzzed with unusual activity. The police had arrived, not at Poirot's request, but summoned discreetly by Léonide Marchand after news of Vivienne's condition continued to draw press attention. It was not ideal. Poirot preferred to operate without official interference until the moment of revelation. But now the police wished to show they were taking the matter seriously. The inspector sent, one Jules Fournier, was young and overeager. He had the look of a man determined to make a name for himself. With his hair slicked flat and a notebook already half full of scribbled conjecture, he greeted Poirot with an air of condescending politeness. Monsieur Poirot, he said briskly, you've done some admirable work, I hear. But I believe this case may not be so complicated as everyone claims. Poirot, standing near the grand staircase in the theater foyer, raised an eyebrow. No. Then you have identified the villain, mon ami. Fournier glanced at his notes. A technician named Jean-Claude Vasseur. He was responsible for the rigging mishap. He's also been disciplined in the past for negligence and once for minor theft. A rather untrustworthy type. Poirot's mustaches twitched ever so slightly. And what would be his motive, Inspector? Fournier looked up. He may have been bribed. Or perhaps he had a grudge against Mademoiselle St. Clair. Poirot inclined his head slightly. An imaginative theory. Has he confessed? He ran, Fournier said with satisfaction. Did not show up for his shift this morning. We found a half-packed suitcase in his flat. It speaks volumes. Poirot remained silent. For a moment, he simply stared at the velvet-covered stairs as if reading invisible threads of logic woven into the floorboards. Then he turned his gaze back to the inspector. "Running may indicate guilt," Poirot said, "or fear. There is a difference. A man may flee a crime he did not commit because he fears not being believed." Fournier waved a hand. He had access to the dressing rooms. He was unaccounted for during the final act, and he had no affection for the company. He was openly bitter about being overlooked for a promotion. "Did anyone see him near Vivienne's dressing room?" "Not directly," Fournier admitted, "but the opportunity was there." Poirot paused. "Let me speak to him when you find him." Not before Fournier smirked. "If we find him." He may already be on a train to Marseille. Poirot watched the inspector retreat up the corridor with mild disapproval. Then he returned to the green room, where Léonide Marchand was holding an emergency company meeting. The tension in the air was so thick, it could have been sliced with a letter opener. Odette Mercier sat stiffly in one corner, eyes wide with theatrical concern. Henri Duval paced near the fireplace, puffing furiously at a cigarette. Sébastien Lenoir, as usual, leaned silently against the wall, arms crossed, absorbing everything. Charles Devine was notably absent. Léonide addressed the group. "As you are all aware, Inspector Fournier has identified a suspect in the matter of Vivienne's collapse and the alleged sabotage. Jean-Claude Vasseur." A murmur ran through the room. Duval barked, "Typical." "I always said that man was a liability." Odette looked pale. "He always stared at Vivienne." "It made her uncomfortable," Poirot observed quietly, letting the accusations fly. Then, as the silence settled, he stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "sometimes a man looks guilty because it is convenient for him to do so. But ask yourself, what does he gain? Fame? Influence? Number? He had no power over Vivienne, nor a motive rooted in personal advantage. No, this is a red herring, I fear." "A distraction," Léonide frowned. "Then why run?" "Because someone made him believe he would be blamed," Poirot said. "Someone clever enough to shift suspicion in his direction." He glanced at Odette. "Mademoiselle, you said he made Vivienne uncomfortable. Do you recall any specific incident?" She blinked. "Just the usual." Lingering near the wings. Once she said he was loitering near her bag, but nothing came of it. Poirot turned to Duval. "And you, monsieur? Any altercations with Jean-Claude?" "None worth remembering," Duval said gruffly. "He was lazy." That's all. Poirot moved on. "Monsieur Lenoir, did he have access to the fly system the day of the first sandbag incident?" Lenoir shook his head. "He shouldn't have. That day, I handled the rigging personally. Jean-Claude was off shift." The room fell still. Poirot looked directly at Léonide Marchand. "Madame, I respectfully suggest that Jean-Claude could not have caused the incident." Léonide's lips thinned. "So the inspector is wrong?" Poirot nodded. "Or misled." At that moment, a junior staff member entered with a note for Poirot. He opened it slowly and read the contents. His expression did not change, but a quiet energy seemed to awaken in his manner. He turned to the group. "Vivienne has spoken." The room froze. "She remembers?" Odette asked, voice almost hopeful. Poirot shook his head. "No, but she has begun repeating a phrase, 'the girl in the blue dress.'" He let the sentence linger. "Was it a line from the play?" Léonide asked. Duval answered quickly, "No. Not in the script." Poirot's eyes scanned each face. "Does anyone recall such a girl? Perhaps someone backstage the night of the incident?" Odette's eyes darted. Just for a second. Poirot caught it. He turned to her. "Mademoiselle, what did you wear the night of the final performance?" She flinched. "My costume. It was mauve. And afterward?" I changed quickly and left." "I don't remember," Lenoir interrupted. "No, wait. I do recall. You wore a blue wrap." Silk. You borrowed it from wardrobe, didn't you? The one from Madame de Sade. Odette flushed. It was cold. I meant to return it. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Mademoiselle, did you go to Vivienne's dressing room after the performance? Yes, just briefly. She wasn't there. I thought she might need help packing. I only stayed a moment. Why did you not mention this before? I didn't think it mattered. Oh, but it does, Poirot said. Because if Jean-Claude was not present, and you were, wearing a blue dress, it is possible that you are the last person Vivienne saw before she forgot who she was. Odette stood up abruptly. That's absurd. I didn't do anything. I barely spoke to her that day. Poirot's voice remained calm. No one is accusing you, mademoiselle. But you understand, yes, why this detail matters. Odette sat slowly, trembling. Leonide turned to Poirot. What do we do? Poirot folded the note into his pocket. We do not rush. This is not yet the denouement. The pieces are still moving. He looked once more at Odette, then at Duval, and finally toward the hallway that led to Vivienne's recovery suite. There is a truth here, Poirot said, buried beneath theater masks and half-finished scenes. But the curtain has not yet fallen, and in his mind, one thought pulsed steadily. The girl in the blue dress saw something, or did something, and that is why Vivienne forgot. The next morning, the Théâtre des Rêves resumed rehearsals, though no one truly rehearsed. The actors moved through scenes like ghosts, their lines flat, gestures hollow. Vivienne's absence hung over them like dust in sunlight, seen, felt, but not spoken of. Word had spread quickly about her strange phrase, the girl in the blue dress. It became a silent refrain in the corridors, a question no one dared answer aloud. Hercule Poirot returned not as an interrogator, but as an observer. He did not speak to anyone at first. Instead, he sat in the third row of the auditorium, hands clasped neatly in his lap, and watched. He watched how Duval snapped at stagehands when lights weren't perfect. He watched how Odette avoided the left wing, where Vivienne used to make her first entrance. He watched how Lenoir wrote furiously in his logbook, as though controlling his pen could control the tension around him. Poirot knew the time for direct questions had passed. Now, it was time to provoke. Subtly, precisely. He began with a single note delivered quietly to Odette's dressing room during the lunch break. The note was unsigned. It read, "She remembers more each hour." Odette found it when she returned from the cafeteria. Her hands shook slightly as she read it. She looked around, but no one was near. A mirror reflected her pale face, framed by blonde waves and a too-tight smile. Poirot, from his post near the prop table, noted her reaction carefully. He approached her an hour later, as she rehearsed a scene alone on stage. "You have received troubling news?" he asked gently. Odette startled, then forced a laugh. "No, just tired." "This whole situation is exhausting." "Of course," Poirot said. "Fear is very draining, especially the fear of being remembered." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot tilted his head. "Let us suppose, purely as a game, that Mademoiselle Sinclair had begun to recover fragments of memory. Perhaps an image, a voice, a scent. Let us say she recalls a blue silk wrap. Would that alarm you?" Odette crossed her arms. "If you're accusing me of something—" "Non, non," Poirot said quickly. "I accuse no one. I am simply interested in behavior. You see, mademoiselle, a guilty person seeks to silence memory. An innocent one seeks to clarify it." Odette's mouth opened, but no words came. Poirot let the silence grow until she turned away and resumed her lines, her voice slightly thinner than before. He moved on. Next was Henri Duval. Poirot found him in the lighting gallery, surrounded by blueprints and empty cigarette boxes. The air reeked of frustration and cologne. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Duval said without looking up. come to ask more questions about imaginary threats? I merely come to converse, Poirot replied. The imagination, you see, is not so different from guilt. Both invent scenarios to ease the mind. Duval slammed his pencil down. You think I made her forget herself? That I sabotaged my own play? Poirot shrugged. It is possible. But I ask myself, why would a man try to remove the one actress who gave his script life? Duval stared at him. I wouldn't. No, Poirot agreed. You would not. But what if you knew she planned to leave the production before opening night? What if you believed she had discovered something damaging about you, perhaps professional misconduct, falsified credits, inappropriate advances? Duval stood sharply. Those are serious accusations. Indeed, Poirot said. Fortunately for you, I'm not making them. Yet Duval's face twisted. She was paranoid, always whispering to Charles, always writing letters. She thought everyone was out to get her. She was not wrong, Poirot said simply. Someone was. He left Duval with that. Poirot's third stop was the hospital. Vivienne had been moved to a private clinic outside Paris at Leonide's request. The rooms were bright, the staff discreet, and the atmosphere quiet. Poirot sat by her bed. She no longer looked panicked, just vacant. Her face was painted with confusion, not fear. She held the same locket Poirot had found earlier, now strung on a velvet ribbon. Do you remember this? He asked softly. She touched it with careful fingers. I don't know. I think it was given to me. By someone I cared for, or someone I feared. Poirot nodded. And the girl in the blue dress? Vivienne blinked. She was there. Before the lights went out. The lights? Vivienne looked down. There was a moment. The mirror shimmered. And then, nothing. Poirot leaned closer. Do you remember a letter? Her hands gripped the blanket. Someone took it. I knew it would happen. What was in it? Vivienne paused. I think it had the name of someone I was once. And someone I was running from. Poirot didn't press. Her memories were surfacing like broken glass in a pond, slowly, dangerously. He stood to leave, but before he reached the door, she said one more thing. She said, you should never have come back. Poirot turned. Who said that? Vivienne stared into the distance. The girl in the blue dress. Poirot walked slowly to the clinic's parking area, mind turning over this new piece. Odette had said she entered the dressing room after the show. She claimed Vivienne wasn't there, but Vivienne remembered her, and a threat. You should never have come back. It was not the language of jealousy. It was the language of warning. Back at the theater, Poirot asked to review the security logbook. It was Lenoir who brought it to him. Odd request, Lenoir said, placing the thick red ledger on the desk. But here it is. Poirot flipped through it. Sign-ins, exits, technician shifts. Then he found something strange. 2 weeks ago, before the show's premiere, there was an unscheduled late-night entry. One name, written in a different hand than the rest. Monsieur Sauvage? Poirot tapped the page. Do you recognize this? Lenoir leaned over. No, it's not one of our staff. And no one should have access that late. Was there anything stolen? Not that we know of. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Unless something was placed instead. The pieces were tightening. A false name entered the theater. A letter went missing. A past returned, and someone told Vivienne she should never have come back. Not because of the play, because of something older. Buried. As Poirot prepared to leave, Charles Devine finally reappeared. I hear you've been playing chess with ghosts, he said with a wan smile. Poirot studied him. I believe, monsieur, that someone has been playing a far crueler game. And I am nearly ready to name the player. Devine looked startled. You know, who did this? Poirot nodded slowly. Not just who, But why? He walked away without another word, letting the silence act as the final move in a psychological duel already half won. That evening, the sky over Paris darkened into a heavy curtain of grey, mirroring the sense of suspense thickening within the Théâtre des Rêves. A storm was coming, not of thunder and rain, but of revelations. Poirot could feel it in the shift of glances between cast members, in the nervous way Odette kept checking over her shoulder, in the way Henri Duval lit one cigarette with the stub of the last. But Poirot's next step was not within the theatre itself. It was in a modest apartment building 3 blocks away, above a patisserie that still smelled of butter and almonds. The tenant in question was Jean-Claude Vasseur. The vanished technician Inspector Fournier had pegged as the convenient suspect. Poirot had sent a message through discreet channels, and by the time he arrived, Jean-Claude was waiting, hunched over in his kitchen chair, looking 10 years older than his photograph in the theatre files. "I didn't run because I was guilty," he said before Poirot could even sit down. "I ran because I knew they'd pin it on me." "Oui," Poirot said calmly, "and yet you left behind a suitcase half-packed." Jean-Claude glanced up. "I was deciding. Then I thought, what's the point? They've already made up their minds." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me what you saw." "No one else. Just you and your conscience." Jean-Claude took a breath, exhaled slowly. 2 nights before the show, I was doing a rig check. I heard voices in Vivian's dressing room, angry ones. A woman's voice, accusing. Vivian's voice, calmer but firm. I heard her say, "You can't frighten me anymore." Then a bang, like something fell. I waited, but when I looked inside, no one was there. Just the smell of perfume. "Did you recognize the other voice?" He hesitated. "Maybe. I thought it might be Odette's, but I couldn't be sure. Later I went back. Just curious. Stupid, maybe. And found a small piece of paper under the vanity." "A letter?" "No, a torn bit. Just a name." Jules Sauvage Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You kept it?" "I threw it away the next day. I didn't want to get involved. Too late for that," Poirot murmured. Back at the theatre, the final rehearsal was postponed after Sébastien Lenoir reported a break-in. The prop room, normally locked with a heavy brass key, had been found open. A search revealed something had been taken, an antique perfume bottle from the 1930s used in Act 2 for Vivian's character. It was an original piece, filled with rose water and stored separately due to its value. "Who knew it was kept there?" Poirot asked, his voice cool and precise. "Everyone in the cast," Lenoir replied. "But only a few people had keys. Me, Odette, Duval, and Léonide." Poirot walked through the prop room himself. Shelves of labeled boxes, fabric bundles, and dust-covered wigs lined the walls. The cabinet where the perfume was kept had no signs of forced entry. Whoever had taken it had known exactly what they wanted and how to access it. Poirot stood silently, breathing in the faint trace of rose. "A scent can summon memory," he said quietly. "Or destroy it." He turned sharply to Lenoir. "Find Odette. Bring her to the green room." Alone, Odette arrived 10 minutes later, confused, clutching a script she wasn't rehearsing from. "What's going on?" she asked. Poirot gestured to the empty stage. "Mademoiselle, please indulge me in a small performance." "Only a few lines," she blinked. Now, Poirot said. "Imagine you are in Vivian's dressing room. The play has ended. She is seated at her mirror. You are standing behind her. You have the perfume bottle in hand." "What do you say?" Odette looked stricken. "I don't understand." "You do," Poirot said, "but you are afraid to admit it. Mademoiselle, the scent from that bottle, the very one now missing, was found on Vivian's scarf. A scarf she wore only that night. And the woman she remembers was wearing a blue dress." Odette stood frozen, mouth slightly parted. "You think I drugged her with perfume?" Poirot stepped forward. Hyoscine, scopolamine. It has been used before, diluted, inhaled, timed perfectly. A few drops in the lining of a perfume bottle. Enough to disorient, erase short-term memory. And who would suspect it in a prop she herself used nightly? Odette shook her head. I wouldn't even know how. But someone would, Poirot said gently. Someone like Henri Duval, who has long relied on mood-enhancing substances to manage his nerves, or someone who overheard a discussion, who found an old prescription bottle in a drawer backstage. Or, perhaps, someone who wanted the role so badly that sabotaging Vivien's mind seemed easier than waiting for her to quit. Odette's eyes filled with tears. She was going to leave. She told me the night before the premiere. She said she had found something in the envelope, a name from the past. She said she couldn't stay. Poirot's voice was low. And you couldn't let her go. Not like that. Not when you were so close. She was going to ruin the show. Odette's voice cracked. And for what? Some old letter? Some life she wanted to run back to? She was never running back, Poirot said. She was being dragged. Odette collapsed into the chair. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to forget long enough for the premiere. To stall her, to make her stay. But you lost control, Poirot said. Because memory is not a switch. It returns when it is ready, and when it does, it bites. As if on cue, Lenoir returned, ashen. Monsieur Poirot. News from the clinic, Poirot turned. Yes, Vivienne is gone. Discharged herself. Left in the middle of the night. No one knows where Odette gasped. Gone? Poirot's expression did not change. She remembers more than we thought. He turned and walked out of the room, Odette's sobs echoing behind him. Outside in the evening air, he felt the pressure rise again, not from confusion, but from proximity. The mystery was coiling tighter. Vivienne was not lost. She was searching, and if she found what she was looking for before Poirot did, there might yet be a second crime. Vivienne St. Clair had vanished from the clinic before dawn, leaving behind only a page torn from her medical chart and the locket Poirot had once retrieved from her dressing table. The page bore 3 words in pencil, scrawled in an unsteady hand, Rue Vauquelin. Midnight, alone. The handwriting, unmistakably hers, seemed to confirm what Poirot had begun to suspect. Vivienne's amnesia had cracked wide open. What she remembered, whether it was the identity of the person who had drugged her or the secret that letter contained, was still uncertain. But she had remembered enough to act. Rue Vauquelin was a narrow, crooked street tucked behind the Pantheon, filled with aging apartment blocks, shuttered bookstores, and one modest cafe that stayed open into the early hours. Poirot knew it well. He also knew it was not a place one visited idly in the middle of the night. It was a rendezvous point, a place for things once buried to return. He kept the message to himself. No police, no theater staff. Not yet. The play was still unfolding, and Poirot had no intention of letting the final act go unwatched. But before he left for Rue Vauquelin, there was one more detail to examine. One that had lingered in the back of his mind ever since his visit to Vivienne's dressing room. The envelope. The one addressed to Juliette Sauvage. He returned to the theater alone, entering through the side-stage door. The corridor lights flickered slightly, and the distant creak of rigging echoed like footsteps in a chapel. The dressing room was locked, but Poirot had acquired a key from Lenoir under the pretense of retrieving Vivienne's remaining possessions. Inside, everything remained undisturbed. The scent of lilies had faded. The tea had gone cold and murky. Poirot sat at the vanity, letting his reflection stare back at him as his mind traced the logic again. Vivienne, Juliette, had received a letter that startled her. She had hidden the envelope, but discarded the content. Why? Not because it was unimportant, because it was dangerous. Poirot opened the hidden drawer once more and removed the envelope. The back bore a torn wax seal, smeared in dark red. The handwriting had a masculine flourish, and the ink had bled in places. But this time, Poirot noticed something he had not before. An indentation along the lower edge, almost like a thumbprint pressed in haste. He tilted it toward the light and saw faint traces of green residue around the flap. Ink, possibly from a fountain pen that had leaked. Poirot retrieved a clean sheet of paper from his notebook and gently rubbed the side of a pencil across the inside of the envelope. As he suspected, faint impressions from a previous letter emerged. Partial words, incomplete phrases. He could make out, returning to Paris. You cannot hide forever. Jules will not forgive. Jules. The same name Jean-Claude claimed to have seen on the torn scrap weeks earlier. Jules Sauvage. Not Juliet. Not Vivienne. A man. Poirot straightened slowly in the chair. The letter had not come from someone seeking Vivienne. It had come from someone connected to her former life. Someone she had fled, someone dangerous enough that she erased her identity to escape him. And now, he had returned. Jules Sauvage. Brother? Lover? Husband? Poirot didn't know yet. But Vivienne did. And she had gone to Rue Vauquelin to face him. Alone. He slipped the envelope into his coat and exited the theater just as the cathedral bells rang midnight across the Latin Quarter. Rue Vauquelin was cloaked in shadow, save for a single gas lamp flickering beside an iron gate. The street was empty. No cars, no passers-by, just the silent weight of memory lingering in the air. Poirot walked slowly, eyes sweeping each doorway, each arch. Then he saw her. Vivienne, no longer fragile, no longer lost, stood beneath the street lamp, her coat drawn tightly around her and her hair pinned back with deliberate precision. She turned as he approached, not surprised. "I knew you'd come," she said. "You left without a word." "I left a destination," she replied. "You were always better at following the path than I was." Poirot stood beside her. "Jules?" She nodded. "He's coming." "He's always been coming. You remember him." "I never forgot," she said quietly. "I just buried him. Like the rest of that life." "Who is he, mademoiselle?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, "My brother." Poirot said nothing, letting her continue. "He was arrested in Marseille 12 years ago. Extortion, battery, threats against clients. My mother died the same week. I left everything, took a new name. I was finished with being Juliet. I didn't want to be a side character in someone else's crime story, and yet he wrote to you. He found me. Somehow. He always said he would." Her voice dropped. "The letter said he needed money. That he'd reveal my past if I didn't meet him. Said he still had photos. That I'd always belonged to him. Like I did back then." Poirot felt a quiet anger stir beneath his composed exterior. "And so you hid the letter?" "I burned it," she said. "The envelope. I kept it because I thought maybe I was overreacting. But then I started seeing things move in my dressing room. My cues were altered. The same perfume I wore in Marseille showed up, in my costume bag. Little things, enough to make me feel like he was already here." "You told no one?" "I told Charles," she said. "He didn't believe me. Said I was imagining it. But I saw someone in the wings the night before the premiere. I think Jules was already backstage." Poirot's mind raced. "You think he entered the theater?" "He must have. I think he posed as someone else. Maybe even tried to get to me before the show." Poirot turned. "You wrote alone. Why?" "Because if he saw anyone else, he might vanish again. And this time I want to see his face." Poirot didn't approve, but he understood. "And if he does not come?" "He will," she said. "He always does when he wants something." They stood in silence. Then footsteps echoed faintly from the far end of the street. A man emerged from the shadows. Tall, lean coat collar turned up, hat low over his brow. He moved slowly, deliberately. Vivienne straightened. Poirot stepped back, just enough to remain in shadow. The man stopped 6 feet from her. "Juliet," he said. She said nothing. "I knew you'd come." Poirot listened carefully. The voice had a Marseille accent, but it was softened, like someone who had learned to hide it. "You caused quite a stir," Jules said, stepping closer. "That little breakdown in the theater. Very dramatic." "I didn't choose it," she said. "Someone helped." "Not me," he said quickly. "I never touched you. I just wanted to talk. You drugged my perfume. I don't even know what that means. You were backstage. You can't prove that." Poirot stepped forward at last. "But I can." Jules flinched. "Who the hell?" "Hercule Poirot," he said simply. "And you, monsieur, are a poor actor." The security log shows someone entered the theater late under the name M. Sauvage. You left no trace, except the name you once made her hate. Jules sneered. "So what now?" "You think you've got me?" Poirot raised his hand. From the alley behind, Inspector Fournier and 2 plainclothes officers stepped into view. "You made a mistake, Monsieur Sauvage," Poirot said. "You pushed too far." And now the curtain falls. As Jules was led away, Vivienne's knees seemed to soften, but she did not fall. She stood there, unmoving, eyes dry. Poirot turned to her. "It is over." She looked at him. "No, it's only just beginning. I remember everything now." 2 nights later, Léonide Marchand summoned the entire cast and production staff of The Black Rose to the Grand Salon of the Théâtre des Rêves. The theater, though closed to the public, was alive with a tense energy that hummed like an overtuned violin string. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing the stage, and a single spotlight lit the space where Hercule Poirot now stood. Immaculate as ever, his hands folded behind his back, his eyes calm but burning with purpose. "This evening," he began, "I ask for your full attention. The story we have all lived these past days, a story of confusion, fear, and deception, has come to its final act. And now we must all take our places. For every one of you, mes amis, has been part of this performance." There was a ripple among the seated. Duval crossed his arms tightly. Odette sat motionless, her face unreadable. Charles Devine stood at the back, half shrouded in shadow. Vivienne St. Clair, now fully recovered and composed, sat silently in the front row, her expression guarded but firm. Poirot continued. "We have all been occupied by the question, who caused Mademoiselle St. Clair to lose herself? Was it a chemical, a cruel manipulation of the mind? Was it the return of a dangerous man from her past? Or was it someone else entirely?" A murmur swept through the room. Poirot raised a hand. "Let us be precise." Yes, Jules Sauvage returned. He arrived in Paris, threatened Mademoiselle St. Clair, and attempted to extort her with secrets from a life she had buried. He entered this theater under false pretenses. He was the source of the fear that first clouded her thoughts. Duval leaned forward. "So he was the one then?" "Non," Poirot said, turning to him. "He was the storm, but he did not build the stage." He paced slowly. Mademoiselle St. Clair began to suspect sabotage. Her lines rewritten, props moved, accidents narrowly avoided. And finally, she collapsed, disoriented, confused, her memory in fragments. This collapse, I believe, was no accident. He turned sharply toward Odette. "Mademoiselle Mercier, you had both motive and opportunity. You understudied Vivienne. You envied her. You feared being eclipsed forever in her shadow. And when she received the letter from her brother, you saw your chance." All eyes turned to her. Odette's jaw trembled slightly, but she said nothing. You entered her dressing room after the final performance, as you claimed. But you stayed longer than you admitted. You used the prop perfume bottle, modified with a sedative you learned about from overheard conversations between Duval and the theater physician. A dosage meant to confuse, not kill. To erase just enough. You can't prove, she began, but Poirot raised his voice just enough. The bottle was recovered yesterday. It was discarded behind the prop shed, hidden in a discarded costume sleeve. The lab confirmed a trace of scopolamine, and your fingerprints were the only ones on the inside of the cap. Gasps filled the room. Odette stood, shaking. She was leaving the play. I just wanted one chance to be seen. I didn't mean for it to go so far. But it did, Poirot said gently. Because memory is not a script. It returns on its own cue. He turned now to Duval. Monsieur Duval, your guilt is of a different sort. You knew what Odette had done. Perhaps not the full method, but you knew she had tampered with something. And you chose to say nothing. Duval's voice was low. She was right. Vivienne had grown paranoid. She was going to destroy the production. My name, my reputation. It would all go with her. Poirot's voice did not soften. So you rewrote lines, shifted blame, allowed a woman's mind to crumble so your play could stand tall. Léonide Marchand stood abruptly. This is appalling. You, both of you, could have killed her. Poirot held up a hand. Murder is not always with blade or bullet, madame. Sometimes it is by silence, omission, or manipulation. But yes, had Vivienne reacted badly to the drug, or walked into the stage pit during her confusion, we would now be discussing a corpse. Vivienne herself had not moved. She spoke only now, her voice steady. You drugged me, Odette. Odette nodded once, shame coloring her face. I just wanted to be you. Just once, Vivienne's reply was cold. You'll never understand me until you've had to forget who you are, just to survive. Poirot turned now to Charles Devine. And you, monsieur, you protected Vivienne, yes. But you also lied. You said you didn't know about the letter's contents, but you did. You encouraged her to hide it. You thought shielding her from confrontation would protect her. Instead, it made her more vulnerable. Charles nodded silently. Poirot closed his notebook. There are no more secrets. Mademoiselle Sinclair has remembered everything. Her past, her brother, her name, her voice. You tried to take it from her, and she has reclaimed it. Odette sat, head bowed. Duval stared into the middle distance, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Charles walked quietly to Vivienne's side and stood, a silent sentinel. Poirot turned to Léonide. The law will take its course. The theater must decide what it becomes next, but tonight you are all witnesses to the truth. The performance has ended, the masks have fallen, the story is finished, and with that, Hercule Poirot walked down from the stage, the spotlight dimming behind him as silence settled like a final curtain. The Théâtre des Rêves was never quite the same after that night. Word of the scandal leaked slowly, then all at once. The press circled like vultures, sniffing out the scent of gossip, betrayal, and failed ambition. The actress who forgot her name became a headline across Paris, and not just in theatrical columns. Within days, Odette Mercier was suspended, her name removed from the cast lists, and Henri Duval's script was withdrawn from further performance by Léonide Marchand herself. But inside the echoing, emptied corridors of the theater, where the dust had barely begun to settle, Hercule Poirot remained, tying off the final threads. Vivienne sat in the old rehearsal room, dressed in street clothes now, no longer hiding behind character or costume. Her face was still pale, her features tighter than before, but her eyes were clear. She watched. Poirot paced slowly before the wide window overlooking the stage. "I'm not angry," she said at last. "Not at her." Poirot turned. You should be. Vivienne offered a brittle smile. Maybe. But when you've spent years running from someone who made you disappear on purpose, what Odette did, it feels like a shadow of something worse. She didn't want to destroy me. She just wanted to be me. Poirot took a seat beside her. And Jules? Her fingers twitched. Gone again. Perhaps for good this time. But I know he'll always be somewhere. A shadow behind the curtain. You are no longer Juliette Sauvage, Poirot said gently. But you must decide what Vivienne St. Clair becomes now. The role you choose, madame, is yours to write. She exhaled. I thought forgetting would save me. But it only delayed everything. It was remembering that set me free, Poirot nodded. There is one detail that remains. She raised an eyebrow. The letter, he said. You claim to have burned it. But you didn't. Did you? Vivienne hesitated. Poirot continued. You tore it. Hid the envelope. But the body of the letter was left in the false drawer. You wanted to forget it, but not destroy it. That tells me something. Vivienne looked away. It was a part of me. As awful as it was, it reminded me why I left, why I had to become someone else. It was a wound I didn't want to reopen, but I couldn't throw it away. Poirot stood. We carry our wounds, madame, but we do not let them dictate our endings. Later that day, Poirot summoned Léonide Marchand to the now dark auditorium. She arrived wrapped in a fur coat, eyes heavy with disappointment and fatigue. I owe you a debt, she said simply. You exposed them. Saved her, Poirot inclined his head. Not saved, madame. She saved herself. I simply rearranged the set pieces. Léonide gave a tired laugh. Will you return for the next premiere? Perhaps, Poirot said, if the actors stay on the stage this time. She left without asking any more questions. As Poirot gathered his belongings from the small office he'd commandeered for the week, Sébastien Lenoir entered carrying a cardboard box. Thought you might want this, he said. We found it in the archives. A photo. From 10 years ago, he handed Poirot a framed black and white image, an old company portrait from Marseille. In it, a younger woman stood at the edge of a row of theater staff. Vivienne, or rather, Juliette. Standing beside her, arm loosely slung around her shoulder, was Jules Sauvage. The two looked strikingly different. Her poised, distant, alert. Him casual, smirking, too close. Poirot studied it. Thank you, Monsieur Lenoir. It is good to see her past with new clarity. Lenoir nodded. She was stronger than any of us gave her credit for. That evening, Poirot took a final walk through the theater. The dressing rooms were cold. The green room empty. The stage still littered with unstruck props and discarded programs. He paused near the wings, staring out across the rows of vacant seats. So many truths had been spoken here, not just by actors, but by the people who wore roles outside the scripts. And in this place of illusion, the most dangerous lies had been the ones people told themselves. Poirot touched the polished edge of the curtain rope and murmured to no one in particular, when the final act ends, the question is not who applauds, but who remains standing outside. He stepped into the street just as Vivienne was leaving through the main entrance. They paused. No words. Just the flicker of mutual understanding between two people who had shared a darkness and come through it, each bearing scars the world might never see. Then, with a nod, they parted ways. He into the night, and she into a new beginning. 2 weeks had passed since the curtain fell on the final performance that never was, yet echoes of the mystery still lingered across the marble halls and velvet corridors of the Théâtre des Rêves. Paris had moved on, as Paris always does, but inside certain drawing rooms, cafes and police offices, the name Vivienne St. Clair and the secrets tied to her remained a favored topic of quiet speculation. Justice, Poirot knew, is rarely as theatrical as guilt. It moves slowly, quietly. And in this case, it had arrived not with applause, but with signatures. Odette Mercier had confessed in full. The drugged perfume, the confrontation in the dressing room, the reckless belief that if Vivienne forgot long enough, she might never return to reclaim the spotlight. Her arrest was discreet, and Poirot, per her lawyer's request, had attended no hearings. He had no interest in watching the public unravel a woman whose worst crime, he believed, was desperation twisted into sabotage. Henri Duval faced no criminal charges, though he was barred from producing in Parisian theaters for the foreseeable future. His cowardice, his complicity in maintaining Vivienne's confusion, had not risen to legal betrayal, but it was betrayal nonetheless. And in the realm of art, reputations rarely recover from such stains. Jules Sauvage had disappeared into the French justice system, charged with attempted blackmail, identity fraud, and trespassing. But for Vivienne, it was not the verdict that brought relief. It was knowing he was no longer hiding in the wings. The letter had become a closed chapter. What he once held over her, his threats, his knowledge, even her past name, now meant nothing. She had taken it all back, publicly. Léonide Marchand held a press conference shortly after the arrests were made public. "We at the Théâtre des Rêves," she announced, "have always believed in transformation. But it must come through art, not through fear. Our next production will not be The Black Rose, but something new, something real." She paused then, the cameras clicking, and looked to the side of the stage where Vivienne stood, not as an actress waiting for a cue, but as a woman who had survived a play written in secrets. "She will star in a piece of her own choosing," Léonide concluded, "and no understudy will be needed." Poirot declined to attend the event. Instead, he sat at a quiet table outside a café in Montmartre, sipping his espresso and reviewing a small notebook filled with the case's final observations. 1. Odette's motive, not malice, but ambition born from years in the shadows. 2. Duval's failure, not action, but inaction, complicity as self-preservation. 3. Vivienne's silence, born from trauma, sustained by fear, but shattered by memory. 4. Jules, the specter of the past, proof that what is buried improperly always resurfaces. He flipped to the last page. There, in his tight, slanted handwriting, he had written, "A role remembered is stronger than one written." He smiled faintly. That evening, a knock came at his hotel suite. It was Vivienne. She wore no makeup, no stage mask, a simple dark coat and a scarf tucked tightly beneath her chin. The only remnant of the theater was her posture, still regal, still composed. "I owe you more than thanks," she said softly. Poirot gestured her inside. "You owe me nothing, madame, but perhaps a conversation." She nodded. They sat across from each other by the window as the Seine flickered with reflections of passing lamps. She looked out for a while before speaking. "There's something odd about losing yourself," she said. "I thought forgetting who I was would be the worst part. But it wasn't. It was remembering and realizing who I'd let myself become." Poirot didn't interrupt. "I spent years building Vivienne. Carefully. She was strong, sharp, beautiful when she needed to be, cold when she had to be. She never cried backstage. She never faltered. But she was also lonely, controlled, always afraid someone would recognize the old name in her eyes. Until someone did," Poirot said quietly. She nodded. "Jules wanted me to be Juliette again. But he didn't understand. I had already killed her. I became Vivienne because I had to survive. But I stayed Vivienne because I thought that was all I was allowed to be." Poirot tilted his head. "And now?" Vivienne smiled. Not the painted one she used on stage. but something smaller, truer. Now I get to choose. She stood to leave, but turned before reaching the door. "There's a new production," she said. "A revival of Medea. Leonide offered it to me. I haven't said yes yet." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You hesitate?" "It's not the role," she said. "It's the mask. I'm tired of them." Poirot nodded. "Then perhaps the time has come to write your own script. No more roles. No more forgetting." She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "If I do, will you come see it?" Poirot allowed a rare smile. "If the seats are not too far, back." She laughed, a real one, quick and light, and then left. The door clicked shut. Poirot turned to the window, letting the silence of the room wrap around him like an old coat. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Cars, voices, lights flickering in apartment windows, and somewhere beyond it, a woman who had once been lost was walking freely again, no longer shadowed by memory. The case had begun with a vanishing name. It ended with its return, on her terms. In his notebook, Poirot wrote one final line. She forgot herself. They tried to rewrite her, but in the end, she remembered everything and changed the ending. He closed the book and rose, his silhouette small against the grand window, a quiet observer of human tragedy, deception, and survival. His work was done. And somewhere, beyond the glow of the gaslights and curtain calls, the world applauded a woman who had finally taken center stage. Not as Juliet, not as Vivian, but as herself. Paris glowed softly in the early evening light, the kind of gentle amber hue that made even the narrowest alleyways appear dignified. It was a city built on memory. Its architecture, its art, its people, and for Hercule Poirot, it was a fitting backdrop to conclude a case that had hinged not on blood or body, but on the erasure and resurrection of identity. He strolled quietly along Rue des Martyrs, cane in one hand, gloves in the other, the February air cool against his cheeks. His mind, usually so quick to vault ahead to the next problem, remained still, lingering on the story of the actress who forgot her name. There had been no murder, no screaming climax, no dramatic final blow in the traditional sense. And yet, it had been one of the most disturbing cases Poirot had encountered in recent years, because it revealed just how fragile the human sense of self could be when bent by fear and molded by others. A theft had occurred, certainly. A theft of memory, a theft of control, a theft of voice. Vivienne, Juliet, had not merely lost her name. She had nearly lost her right to her own story. He stopped at a bench overlooking the Seine, where the water ran quietly beneath a bridge etched with the initials of long-faded lovers. As he sat, he retrieved a small envelope from his inner coat pocket. A letter, unsent, folded twice. No address on the front, only a name in Vivienne's handwriting, to myself. She had given it to Poirot the morning after their final conversation. Not for the police, she'd said, not for any court. Just for someone who would understand he had yet to open it. He considered doing so now, but found he didn't need to. He already understood what it likely contained. Perhaps a confession of fear, or a goodbye to the woman she had once been. Perhaps nothing more than a list of truths she never dared speak aloud. It was not the content that mattered. It was that she had written it at all. Vivienne was rewriting her story. Yes, but she had also begun to preserve it, no longer relying on forgetting to protect her. Now she chose to remember. Behind him, the street sounds picked up. A violinist near the metro station had begun to play something slow and mournful, and the notes drifted into the night with weightless grace. Poirot remained a moment longer, watching as the lights blinked to life across the city. He thought of Odette, still in custody, awaiting the final terms of sentencing. He thought of Henri Duval, his name stripped from playbills, now hiding in a vineyard near Bordeaux, reportedly working on a novel. And he thought of Charles Devine, loyal to a fault, but blinded by love to the harm silence can inflict. Each had played a part, each had chosen a mask, and each, in time, had been revealed. It was a truth Poirot had seen before. In every theatre, the real danger often hides in the wings. Behind the velvet, in the quiet applause between acts. As he rose from the bench and resumed his walk, Poirot passed a small bookstore with a poster in the window. Mayday, a new production opening in spring. Star, Vivienne St. Clair. There was no mention of her past. No trace of the scandal. Just her name, as she had chosen to carry it. Poirot entered the shop and purchased a single ticket. Center row, 4th seat from the aisle. He left no name for pickup. When he returned to his flat that night, he placed the unsent letter from Vivienne into a drawer and locked it away. Not as evidence, but as remembrance. It would not be catalogued among his cases. It would not be quoted in memoirs. Some stories, Poirot believed, must be protected. Not for justice, but for dignity. Later, as he sat by the fire and sipped his chocolate, he reflected on something Vivienne had said to him. They always tell you to forget what hurts. But no one tells you that remembering is what makes you whole. That had been the quiet tragedy of this case. Not the betrayal, not even the sabotage, but the idea that a woman had spent years convincing herself that silence was strength. But silence had nearly been her undoing. It was memory and her willingness to reclaim it that had saved her. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth from the hearth draw him away from the echoes of the past. Tomorrow, there would be another letter, another knock at the door, another case, perhaps. But tonight, the world was quiet. And for once, it did not ask him to solve anything, only to sit, to remember, to let the curtain fall without fear. Rain dusted the rooftops of Paris in the soft grey morning light, and the Théâtre des Rêves stood still beneath the clouds, its grand doors shut, its marble foyer silent. Inside, the ghosts of the past few weeks lingered like misplaced stage props, betrayal in the rafters, memory in the dressing rooms, and the last breath of performance trapped beneath the curtains. In a private sitting room above the stage, Hercule Poirot adjusted the crease of his trousers and tapped, his cane once against the tile. Across from him sat Léonide Marchand, her expression composed, though her shoulders sagged more than usual. There was no performance left in her tonight. Odette Mercier has withdrawn her confession, she said quietly. Her solicitor claims coercion. Poirot raised a brow. But the perfume bottle, madame. The drug analysis. The fingerprints. Yes, she said. But her lawyer will say it proves nothing more than a prank. A misguided attempt at mischief. Poirot folded his hands. Let the courts wrestle with interpretation. Truth, I find, is simpler. Odette wanted a moment in the light. She chose the shadows instead, and now she must live in them. Léonide's voice hardened. What of Duval? He will never direct again, Poirot replied. That is justice enough. And Jules Sauvage has been formally charged. He will not threaten her again. She exhaled. Vivienne? Poirot stood slowly. She has remembered who she is. The rest will follow. Later that morning, he found Vivienne in her dressing room, not the old one which had been cleared and locked, but a new space Léonide had offered her upstairs, away from the corridors of bad memories. She stood before the mirror, hair pinned, a script in hand. But it was not Mayday. Something new? Poirot asked. She smiled at his reflection. Something honest. I'm writing. It's about a woman who wakes up with a stranger's face in the mirror and a voice she doesn't recognize. He stepped inside. Ah, autobiography disguised as fiction. I think I need to say it in my own words. Poirot nodded. Words are how we reclaim ourselves. She set the script down. People keep asking if I'll go back to Vivian. I tell them Vivian never left. Juliet was the part I had to abandon, but I still have the right to decide which one I am. Poirot moved toward the window where the fog hung low over the Seine. And which one are you? She smiled. Neither. I'm something between. Something I haven't named. Yet Poirot turned, his expression softening. Then you are more complete than most. You see, madame, many live their lives entirely as someone else. Never questioning, never choosing. Vivienne came to stand beside him. And what about you, Monsieur Poirot? Have you always been only yourself? He chuckled gently. Mais oui, always. But it has not always made me beloved. Outside, the street lamps flickered in the gray. The city moved on. Taxis hissed through puddles. Cafes opened their shutters. Actors arrived late for auditions. But inside this small corner of the world, two people stood not as detective and victim, but as survivors of a truth that had nearly been erased. Thank you, she said, for finding me. Poirot shook his head. You were never lost. Only rewritten. I merely reminded you where the original script was buried. A few days later, Poirot departed. Paris for London, the case formally concluded. On the train, he reviewed his notes one final time and closed the file with a gentle click. The title on the folder read, Vivienne St. Clair, Identity, Illusion, and Intent. He had added one final line to the report. She was not the actress who forgot her name. She was the woman who chose when to remember it. He folded the page, slipped it into his leather briefcase, and leaned back as the train moved across the French countryside. Outside, spring was beginning to unfurl along the horizon, and inside, Hercule Poirot allowed himself the rarest of comforts. The satisfaction not of catching a killer, but of restoring a life that someone had tried to erase. The case, at last, was closed.